panel with these folks so they can discuss the strengths and weaknesses of their approaches, and Uri's going to moderate that.
I thought I'd just start, though, by some reflections on some of the things I heard, because there's a lot of important information packed in there and a tremendous amount of wisdom. One thing that I can't resist is supporting Selena's idea about surfacing misconceptions, correcting them, and re-embedding them. There's deep knowledge in neuroscience now, C.N. Baylock's work, Steve Posner's work, that shows this also works for math anxiety better than any of the traditional interventions. In randomized controlled trials, much better than Sheila Tobias's work, for example. Very powerful. The classic first example of this was not the foil stuff, but it was the work of John Seely Brown, the great cognitive psychologist who studied children's arithmetic mistakes. And he collected tens of thousands of pieces of work in Latin America of kids learning how to divide fractions. And he found one kid who, instead of multiplying by the reciprocal of the denominator, right, inverting and multiplying, inverted the numerator and multiplied it by the denominator. And they were trying to build a computer model of student errors. So the researcher asked the kid, well, tell me, explain to me what you're doing. And the kid said, I turned over the one near the window. And it turned out the year before when he learned it, the teacher said, turn over the one next to the window. Now he was seated on the other side of the room, facing the other direction. And the question is there, what kind of error is that, right? Is that a mathematical error? Right? Is that a bug? Right. It's very subtle, but this idea of surfacing misconceptions and correcting them and then re-embedding them in knowledge is very, very powerful frontier of research. But we should not only be obsessed about misconceptions, of course. So there were questions about, so you have this situation in which you have core instruction and you have a lab setting. And there's a long history of successful labs, supplemental instruction models, emerging scholars models, the Austin P model, the NCAT model. And they have certain things in common that make them work. What we're seeing is, first of all, the effects on average are small, not big. But the variance is large, and there are very successful versions, and it's the details. So we're studying these now, and here are the things we're seeing that are common to the most successful ones. In the labs, much more explicit ground rules for students about what they have to do. For a lot of students struggling and not clear how to do college, a place where they can actually figure out what they're supposed to be doing and have clarity really matters. The second is what Rosa Serra calls noticing routines. In the most effective of these, we started noticing that in the corner of the board are the names of students who are missing. So one of the standard routines in the labs is for the students to see who's missing, and if the student's missing twice, for someone to contact them. We know now that that is a powerful driver of attendance, because if students know that they're missing, someone will call them up here. These noticing routines are really key. Homework checking. So requiring students, at least by phone, to check their answers before they hand in their homework with someone in the class, and to write on the homework who they checked it with. So that dramatically improves homework doing and connection. And we know now by interviewing students who do this that they talk about other things like, what the hell did that professor want from me? Do you have any idea what went on yesterday in class and stuff like that? So building in minimal systems where students need to touch contact with each other can have very big spill effects, especially for students who are completely unfamiliar with higher education. Mastery routines. About a third of the most successful ones we saw had used things like Carnegie Learning, Agile Mind. There's about 100 of these things, where for certain algorithms, students could practice it and demonstrate mastery. One of the things we've learned is that many of the students in learning support don't know what mastery feels like. So actually giving them an experience where they objectively know they've mastered something and can talk about it has powerful psychological effects on them. They also generate increased student engagement. A really big one, and I agree with you completely, I think Peter Adams is wrong on this, and I'll stand with you, Selena, that students, as the people who run the learning labs, are very powerful if they are properly trained, as she does. And one of the most important functions is for the students to talk about their own successes in math and invite their fellow students into a math community. Where we've seen this work in departments where there were no students hanging around at all. If you have students working in these labs, they hang around in your office and in the common spaces in the math department. So all of a sudden, when other students come in, they're seeing lots of students hanging out there. And that really can start affecting the culture of your department. The best new research on this is David Yeager's work on productive persistence. He's built beautiful measurement models for each of these constructs. And if you follow David Yeager, Y-E-A-G-E-R, you'll start seeing publications on this. And maybe the most important first one was the Yeager-Walton paper. Greg Walton, David Yeager, that talks about why interventions like this actually work psychologically, and interventions that have been tested in randomized controlled trials. It transforms the standard of evidence for the things we try in our labs and classes. The second big thing is that all the programs that are effective, like Focus, Austin P, Peter Adams, which is very effective, all have a local theory of instruction. So the faculty in them agree to some basic principles of instruction. For the new mathways, there are 4 of them. Productive struggle, students will engage in productive struggle and it will be debriefed. Robust connections across topics. Deliberate practice, so there's an evidence standard for what you're practicing. And then what we think is the most important is the use of rich tasks. It turns out that the research evidence in the US and internationally on pedagogy is very weak. People have very strong feelings about one method of teaching being better than another, but the actual evidence is quite weak for that. What we do know, however, is that the quality of tasks that students work on in these programs is enormously important. So what we've done, we have 500,000 kids online now in high schools, 20,000 teachers. For every item, we have a contingency matrix that tells you if students can do this, what's the probability they can do other tasks? Most instructors, and this is Norton Grubb's work, most instructors just choose the odd problems, the even problems. There's no rhyme or reason to what they, but you can get much more learning productivity by carefully choosing tasks. And my confession is that more than half of my favorite tasks turned out to predict nothing when I gave them to 50 to 100,000 students. And it took me 3 or 4 years before I got, actually, even though I've taught all this theory, instructional design, it took me 3 or 4 years before I got better at designing tasks that would actually demonstrate improved learning in later topics. It's much harder than you think. And you really need data in order to get better at this. So that's going to increasingly become available because there are hundreds of companies. It's cheap to do data mining now. So let me turn, first of all, I think that both of you are doing extraordinary work. And it would be criminal for you not to build on it, learn it, honor it. It's crazy to start from scratch, right? So you need to dissect, do an autopsy. So let me ask you, faculty. So Nell and Selena, you are, we call in Brooklyn, you're doers. You do stuff. You roll up your sleeves, you climb in and do it. And both of you have been interested in workshops and learning and improving your teaching. You are not typical faculty members, right? If you were typical faculty members, we'd have much less of a problem. What is your experience in bringing your colleagues on board? What have been the pluses and what have been the challenges of that?
Are we still videotaping?
I think that was a no.
Never, oh dear.
Want me to stand in front of the camera?
Yeah, let's stand.
I'll stand there.
They're going to get pseudonyms, I think.
early in my teaching career, I discovered that I was a truly lousy teacher, and I decided to try to do something about it. And I discovered in the following way. I was a graduate student at Vanderbilt University working on a PhD program designed to teach calculus. And I was teaching the epsilon delta limit definition, and I was doing a beautiful job. And my students were doing a nice job. All of them could do proofs in the linear case, and a lot of them could do quadratics. And I was making out a test, and I needed, do you ever just like need a filler question? You know, you need a few extra points, and you don't want anything that's going to take very long, and you've got enough hard stuff on the test, so you want to put in a freebie. And so I just drew a picture and had a function with a hole or something like that, and just from the picture said what's the limit. And it was this kind of thing from looking at the picture. And students who could do the epsilon delta proofs couldn't answer that question, so I realized they had absolutely no understanding. They'd memorized steps in this proof, and that was a. I'm not going to say that made a difference immediately, but I realized that teaching is not telling, and that the job of the teacher is to structure learning experiences so that students deconstruct what needs to be deconstructed and construct what needs to be constructed. And that sort of became my philosophy. And so I don't have it down. I'm not a very good teacher, but I'm trying to be better, and I think I'm doing some productive things to try to be better. There is a huge perception out there among people that I respect that teaching is telling, and there is and it's very hard to convince people that they need to change what they're doing in the classroom. And I think it's so easy to do subtle things to fool ourselves. If students have trouble with a particular kind of question, we just won't ask that, or we'll give a certain kind of hint, or we'll kind of hedge the issue a little bit. And so I've babbled on, and I'm not sure I've answered your question, but I guess what I probably should have said to start with is I have no idea how to bring folks along.
But you need faculty other than you who can teach these programs. Yes.
No, it's okay. So I think that the commonality is the fact that we're change agents. That in order for it to be done, you have to be the one, the changer needs to be involved. So you took on the class, I took on the class. So if you want to do something, it's sometimes hard to change other people, and actually it's hard to change yourself. I've been trying to get on a diet for I don't know how long, and I can't do it, but I try. But at least it's my locus of control. So if you really set your mind to wanting to do something different, then you're going to have to be the one that goes out there to make it different. And then the other thing is that I think one thing that we all have in common is that we do really want to grow more mathematicians. I mean, we really are all passionate about mathematics. We all love math. We're all good at it. And we wouldn't be here if that wasn't true. So deep in our heart, we care about the well-being of mathematics continuing and people learning it for its intrinsic value and building intrinsic value. So I think that when other faculty members see that is happening, then they'll want to be part of that. Like you say, Yuri, that joyful conspiracy, that be part of something that's working and something that is really meaningful and respects our profession and our content expertise. I really have seen that. Instead of trying to force it, just let them see it. And like you said, you know, you want to make change. You change yourself, you change what you do, and it's baby steps too. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's not. And like I was showing you all these instructional methods. I mean, you pick one. Maybe you pick Think, Pair, Share, and you try it once in the semester. And then next semester you say, okay, I'll try another thing. And it's small. It's small. It can't happen overnight.
But you have other faculty who have to come into this. What kind of supports do you provide people who are doing this for the first or second time?
The most effective thing that we have actually found for bringing a young faculty member along and using some maybe methods that are non-traditional but that we feel are really effective. I think the best thing that person can do is sit in on a colleague's class for a whole semester. It does. I'm talking about somebody who's really doing a good job of using the style of teaching that we're trying to encourage. And when we first started using those E-sections with that liberal arts math class, I'm in an environment now where it would be easier to do, but I spent a lot of time begging and pleading with the administration, which was different administration from what we have now. Please give these faculty members, we were bringing in new faculty members, new PhDs, you know, starting their careers, and they were going to teach some of these classes. I said, please give them a 3-hour course release so they can sit in on a colleague's class and observe how to do this. And it doesn't work if you're talking about somebody changing teaching strategies. It doesn't work just to sit in every now and then because you don't see how they get the student buy-in. The students come to class, the students come to university expecting a very traditional model. And if you do it differently, sometimes their expectations are different. You've got to, it's sort of PR, you know. And so I think if you can get the administration to allow faculty members to have a class off so they can watch another faculty member a whole semester long, that's helpful.
Before you can teach in focus, what kind of orientation?
You do the sit-in, like what Mel said. Before you can be part of the focus program from the instructor perspective, I indoctrinate instructors by having them sit through the class and work at the assistant level. And the other thing that we have, the other mechanism that we utilize is we actually convey our instructional methods and our curricular expectations in writing. So we actually have scripted lesson plans that, and when I say scripted, it's scripted. Like it says, the next ask the student, you know, this. So, I mean, because that was the best way that we could really capture what it was that we wanted that class to look like. And it also has multiple ways to do it. It just doesn't have one way, like, okay, break this group and break these students into groups and give them this, give them that. It says, well, you can do it this way, you can do it this way, or you can do it that way. So that's one of the things that we do. The other thing we do is engage them in professional development. We actually have workshops where all we do is talk about experiential learning. So we really investigate experiential learning, and we just talk about it as an instructional method, and then we look for opportunities for them to see where they think that it would go and how it would work best, and what content is more conducive for it. So a lot of it is modeling, and a lot of talking, a lot of regular talking and discussion about how things went. We don't necessarily use the lesson study model. We do to a certain extent because we all contribute, because the lesson plans are what I like to call living documents, and they evolve, they continue to change, and we add to them, and we correct them. But we do talk a lot about the students and how the lessons go. But we've been doing that for the graduate students because, unfortunately, the graduate students tend to come from content background and not necessarily pedagogical background. So we've had an infrastructure at Texas State in the math department for helping graduate students learn how to teach.
Sort of cold in here, but at my age, you know, it decays slower, so I think of the positives. A second question I want to ask you is both of you have a significant number of students going into statistics. And in many departments that start thinking about this, people have a concern that maybe those students will change their mind and go into STEM. Roughly how many of the students in STAT actually do that? And what do you think about ways of addressing that issue? How would you respond to those concerns?
So your question is, you're concerned that students
The student goes into STAT, is advised into STAT. And then in math departments, people always worry that the student will change their mind and want to go into something that requires calculus.
Oh, okay. In our situation, our learning support system was designed with, I remember I told you how it came about. You know, I found out about it at a faculty meeting one day. It was designed for, to get students, help students succeed in the liberal arts, math, and stats. And there was really nothing specifically designed for the STEM pathway. I'm not sure why. And so I'll have to answer the question that we do have people who are so the students who go through stats, the students who come to Austin Peay with low ACT scores who want to be STEM majors, they are put in the E-section stats class because that's the only thing we have for them. You know? And so one of the things that as I said we want to work on is how to beef up the support for those students who are STEM majors. So we don't really have that issue because that's the path right now.
Which is not part of your design.
Yeah.
So what proportion of the students come out of STAT and decide they want to go further into Cal?
Well, keep in mind that we have the hybrid. We have the college statistics and algebra. So that has already been vetted through the department, the other colleges, the curriculum committees, and so I think we're sort of safe there. But we do have people who change, like I mentioned, and it's a good change. They change their major and their minors to mathematics, so they're going to take more mathematics. And they seem fine with it. I mean, we don't, their biggest concern is making sure that someone continues to teach conceptually and not go back to the procedural knowledge and memorizing things. That's the student's perspective.
Let me just say a word about this. One of our concerns, because we're going to have multiple pathways, is all of you who've taught developmental courses know that when a student has their first success in math, it sort of shocks them. And they go, you mean like I can actually do this? And then some of them get through this period of anger. Why didn't this happen earlier? And it emboldens them to raise their aspirations. So if you're thinking about multiple pathways, which you must do, I think, we're obligated to start thinking through the issue of how we help students bridge. In Texas, we have non-course-based options that are funded, and we're thinking about what those are. But this is going to be one of the hardest things to do. It looks like actually very few students, the students who are interested in art and nursing, and they're not, very few of them decide they want to be engineers. But we still need to keep pathways open, because it would be wrong to build things that limited options rather than expanded. I think that's an area where we need a lot of work to do. No one has really solved this problem. There were some questions from the audience. Let those be dominant.
First, I would like to make a remark about this idea that pedagogy is not working. I don't believe that. I don't believe in that remark.
It's not that pedagogy isn't working. It's that the international research base, when you look at randomized controlled trials of different methods, shows much smaller differences than I personally believe are there. I have very strong views about certain kinds of instruction, but I got to look at the evidence. Yes.
Therefore, you mentioned the most people that the neurology science, the shepherd, and the others are studying how the brain accumulates factors through the mechanism of ocular, looking, that's how the cognitive process goes on. So a teacher has to know that to be able to consider that. So pedagogy is part of psychology, and that is why a person who wants to teach has to learn something how the human mind develops.
No, I agree with that completely. So, if you haven't read it, if you're going to work on this, the National Research Council assembled a committee, and they put together a book called How People Learn. It was chaired by Jim Pellegrino. It was so controversial. To give you the politics, it was so controversial that for one of the only times in its history, the National Research Council had to put together an oversight mediation committee to manage the internal debate, which I got to chair. Scientists had such strong feelings about this that the NRC actually had to put a mediation process in place. But the result is something that everyone signed on, and we know a lot about teaching and learning, about the role of active learning, prior knowledge. That's different. What I meant to say is that people have strong views about lecturing, different forms of collaborative learning, and so on. There, the difference, certain things matter tremendously, but we sometimes have too strong feelings about particular forms of pedagogy. And we should always be skeptical, not cynical, but skeptical.
I got you.
Right.
And before we finish, I just would like to indicate what I say. My institution, you say we have what we call the four course. Alternative for the lecturer, we class another one for 9 to 10 years. If a student should be first, but from his model, 10 years. Mandatory that you take the polytechnic. We didn't close the door. And we also do it because they are not one in the same, and the parents of the three projects of the solution. So we have to make determination whether they have to do that or polytechnic.
Right. I think there's room for one more question, 2 more questions in here, one in there. Let's do this and then you.
I feel like you're like 2 years ahead of where I am now. So let me ask you a question to both of you. Okay? If you were going to be where we are now, we need to make some changes, meaningful changes, not short changes. What advice would you give us?
Good question.
First 3 steps to take. Try not to go down this road. Give us 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you think we need to hear right now at this particular juncture.
Now you want to go first? No one said the questions would be easy. Productive struggle.
No one said the questions would be easy, and nobody's claiming that curriculum redesign or course redesign, nobody's claiming that's easy. And it's worth it, but it's hard, and so I think just being respectful of how difficult it is for folks, because people worry about legitimate things. Sometimes, and sometimes the things that they worry about, it turns out aren't really a problem, but it's something reasonable people would think would be a problem, you know. So I think being as respectful as possible of the fact that change is hard. But the other thing that I would caution you against, and I've heard smarter people than me say this. So you've got to be careful about doing a tiny little pilot, which then sort of goes nowhere. There are a lot of things get piloted that just go into a black hole, and you really kind of I think your chances of success with redesign are better if you just kind of jump in whole hog and develop a new program and hop in and take care of it. And I do think the devil's in the details a lot. A classic example is this thing called the Emporium model. You can find disasters and you can find wonderful results, and I suspect the difference is in some of the implementation details.
Okay. So some of this has been said before earlier, but I'll say it again. I would say one thing is to not reinvent the wheel. Like Uri said, there are some people that are doing some good things, some great things like us. And I can't get a laugh out of y'all, and I have a good sense of humor. You must be multitasking over there. I'm lying. You're doing good though. Your humor's good. I don't know, but Uri's doing good too. So who knows? Anyway, I'll try. I'll keep trying. So don't reinvent the wheel. Look at what people are doing, but also, like Uri used the term composting, making it your own. Because you have to think about the institutional culture. And when we replicate at other sites in Texas, it's different. And one of the first things that people told us was, well, you're a four-year university. We're doing this at a community college. It's different. Or you're in Central Texas, and we're in the Rio Grande Valley. It's different. Or you're, so you eat bagels and we eat tacos. I mean, whatever, and the fact of the matter is the mathematics is the mathematics. And that's one of the beauties of it. And so, and if you go to things that are evidence-based, they're evidence-based for a reason. There's data and research that support that those things work. Like, we've been tossing around cooperative learning. But one thing I haven't told you is there's a study out there that shows that it's not so effective with Asian groups because of the proximity. That's just not in their cultural, that's not part of their culture to get really close to people. In this study, that's what they showed. So it's not really for everybody. It's mostly effective, but you gotta know, what to do and when to do it. So that would be one of the things that I would say. Don't reinvent the wheel, but also know to make it your own. The second thing I would say is don't be afraid to think outside the box. Maybe it was because I was pregnant when I thought about this idea. I mean, I really don't know what it was. I didn't even realize how popular it was going to become. I just thought it made sense. And so go with your instinct. We're all good at math. And there's something that made us good at that. And that's truthfully what I looked towards when I went back to develop some of the models that I developed. So think about the way you think about the way you see your students think, and don't be afraid to try those things out and generalize them. So that would be number 2. Number 3 would be very likened to what Mel just said, which is you have to balance between when you're going to try something, go for it. And don't give up. It's like somebody once told me, well, if you eat a donut, we have a, okay, now you know where my mind is. But anyway, if you have a flat tire, and you're not going to blow out all the other 3 tires, right? It's just like when you're on a diet. Well, if you eat a donut, well, my whole day is shot, and then I'm just going to eat donuts the rest of the day. That's not what you want to do. And so, you want to do a program. You might not think it's working, but give it a chance. make adjustments, but don't radically start all over or shift gears because we didn't give this idea an honest chance. So that's what I would say would be my number 3.
So,
Second. That reminded me of something that I've been trying to block out of my mind for the last 4 years. The first semester that we did the enhanced sections, the linked workshop model, we did it one summer term with 2 classes, and it was an unmitigated disaster. And we learned a lot that summer, and that very next fall we did it whole hog, and it got a lot better. So you're right. Don't be too dismayed because you may have to tweak some things.
So 4 suggestions. The first is get the data on your actual performance. Everywhere we've worked, faculty have folk theory and different ideas about whether there even is a problem. So actually get the data, both about the weaknesses and the successes of your math department. Because you have to honor what people have done well. So data. Second, before you start your program, you should interview some of your students who've been successful and listen to your students. Another way to put this is if you can't see the faces of your students in the data is not going to be all that useful. The third thing is design light. There's a temptation once you climb into it to start doing all this assessment stuff. We call it assessment lust, right? And design lust. Build it light and then tweak it as you get experience. If you build it too heavy with too many theories and too many this, it'll like be our leaden balloon and it'll collapse. And the last is be explicit, make a plan for what you want to do, and find out who among peer institutions is doing something like it, and learn from them, and then take this plan to your administration and frame your work in the broader context of what the university needs to do. Don't just make it about passing math courses and so on. Turn it into something about completion, connect it to the real goals of institutions. Last question over there.
I was just wondering how to what extent you utilize additive factory.
We rely on it heavily. So what I had said earlier, what we have to do, well, okay, honestly, I go around and I see, I think, shows promise. And, well, I'm a full professor in our department, so I have a little bit more leverage that way. So I'm able to look at some of the adjunct faculty and I can see who is already getting good reviews and who students like, and that they're willing to take risks and have been educated somehow in some pedagogy. Then I court them and I tell them, I don't tell them about all the work it's going to take. I just say, you want job satisfaction? Do you really, want to make a difference? That kind of thing. I get John Bailey to run to their office, stuff like that. And then they start the process where they sit in and they really see the math, because it is very magical. I really do believe, and Uri said this earlier too, there's certain models that have made a difference in our world. I would say the workshop model, Uri's the work that we did in California, the worksheets, workshops, that's one of them. I would say Deanne Martin's supplemental instruction is another. And I would say that this idea of doing the co-requisite in a meaningful, conceptual way is another program that in our lifetime has really made a difference in math education. And I've read a lot of stuff, probably not as much as her, but I have read quite a bit of research. And I can honestly say that I've never seen these type of profound results ever, except for these other models, these aforementioned models. And I know this may sound radical and extreme, but it's almost like not giving, if you don't do it, it's unethical, because you know that it works. And it's almost like not giving somebody penicillin when they have an infection. And there's no allergies. So that's how much I see. That's how passionate I am about what I see. It is really nice.
Someone has said that universities are like gigantic immunological systems. They've evolved into being immunological. They can reject almost any foreign invader, which is why the change has to come from within. Maybe we can inject a beneficial virus into departments, but if it doesn't, if it's not governed by faculty and shaped by faculty, it will fail. And if you don't leave enough space for it to be adapted by local faculty, it will fail.